Hi there, Scorpio Time Bender here. Today we're going to talk a little more about tuning into the quantum realm and we're going to talk about timeline potentials. So, in a previous video, Melissa and I talked about the 52 card pickup. I will link it to this video. Please watch that if you're curious about what I mean with 52 card pickup. In this presentation, I will get into the details on our interaction with the quantum realm from my perspective, exploring the difference between quantum thinking and magical thinking and why I believe, and many others believe, there is always hope for the best potential future. We'll explore how we can each feed the energy field of the highest and best potential futures with our energy vehicles and the technology we contain in our bodies, minds, and spirits. In this time of chaos and great change, we all have our roles to play. My role, as I'm beginning to really understand, to bring my authentic perspective to the quantum reality integration, by bringing my voice to the 5D conversation, I hope that I am helping shift the future potentials toward the world that we want, where love is our guiding force, where compassion, co creation, equality, and reciprocity are the foundational elements. So, what is a timeline? So, going from here to there, that's a basic timeline. Like you get in your rocket ship at 8 p.m. and you get to the moon at noon tomorrow. I don't know how long it takes to go in a rocket ship to the moon, but we've heard of like establishing a timeline, when you're trying to solve a crime or a mystery. You're trying to figure out who was where at what time and who has an alibi and what was the timeline that led up to the crime that was solved, so you can figure out, who solved it. We also know about timelines from like childhood milestones. At certain ages, you're supposed to reach certain milestones. And so there's this timeline across time of your milestones and historical timelines, looking back at the way that human beings may have developed on this earth. But what about life? So, our life, here we are. Let's bring it down to us. So, the timeline of life. So, this is my avatar for this conversation. This is my little Scorpio time bender avatar. And I'll talk about her as she sometimes. Here we are, me, she. We're at the age of 53 in the timeline of life. So here we start off in a timeline with me going here in the middle. We've got mom, dad, John, Beth. And if this was our timeline or the fabric of time, so again, go back to that other video if you want to understand fabric of the timeline. Then this would be just like a nice straight trajectory. Like these are all like indications of paths on the timeline. There's a time, these different timelines, and we're going along doing point A to point B to point C down the timeline. This is a straight timeline, nothing much going on in this timeline. It's just no ups or downs, just everything's the same day after day after day. If we lived in a timeline where nothing ever changed, ooh, it's snowing outside, where nothing ever changed, there would be no waves on the timeline. It would just be straight, right? So we'd be living like robots and just doing the same thing every day, day after day. But really, our personal timelines look a little bit more like this, where maybe you started up high on the time you were in a happy childhood, you had all these positive things going on. Early childhood, you lost a parent, you went down into a dark time. Getting into the university age, you enter your early career, you had some high points in your timeline, and then you had another low point, and so on, right? We have these highs and lows in our life story. So maybe the timeline fabric looks a little more like this, and each of these shapes represents a person on the timeline. Kind of like the disco version here. So here's our Ms. Scorpio time bender at the down here in the bottom of this graph here. So this is the now moment. Scorpio time bender is at the point of making a life choice. So at that moment, she has choice A, choice B, and choice C. So let's say Scorpio time bender likes to stay the course and follow the cultural norms, follow her gender norms, follow, the same religion she grew up with, follow the same kinds of things that people in her neighborhood do. She's kind of stays the course, like she doesn't really go do risky things, but she also she just kind of does things correctly, so to speak, and just follows up the B timeline. But these other timelines exist. These other timelines still exist. So maybe potential C, there was a choice. So this is like a choice point here. So she's in the now moment, she's going to choose to go straight, right, or left. Okay. So maybe this is a choice point where she makes a really bad choice, where she drives under the influence of alcohol and gets in a bad accident and injures herself or others, or maybe even kills another person. And her timeline changes to a lower trajectory where maybe the rest of her life she's riddled with guilt and injury, and maybe she goes to jail, and there's kind of a lower vibration timeline where a choice that she made kind of took her down this timeline. Now that's not to say that timeline couldn't change. I'm just saying, like, that would be one potential trajectory. And then another trajectory at this now moment, maybe she chooses to take a real left turn. She decides to make a choice that is outside of her family norm, gender norm, cultural norm, and she does something a little different. Maybe she moves out west, or maybe she has a baby out of wedlock. I don't know, like, what, does something that turns her life in another direction. Maybe it's a small something that makes a big change in the long run, or maybe it's a big something where she gets a big promotion and takes it and goes that way. So at the now moment, which is down here, at this now moment, there are these different potentials that exist. So in our last video, we talked about how at the acorn level, when there's an acorn in the quantum field, there already exists the potential of a tree. There already exists. That's like potential B, let's say. So potential B is that the tree already exists, but there's also potential C where a squirrel finds the nut and eats it. And then there's potential A over here where it becomes a fancy pants, yummy acorn flour pasta, which maybe that's a higher vibration. Who knows? I'm not making any judgments here, just saying different timelines, different potentials exist, right? So these are the potentials that exist for this acorn. There's many others, right? Many, many, many others. I'm just narrowing it down to 3. So then what happens when we're doing our own timeline? So we've got the one on the down and up timeline, and then we have another person over here who's kind of doing the equal and opposite timeline, where maybe they started out early in life with a really hard childbirth that left them like very sickly as a child, or maybe they had physical disabilities as a child, but somewhere along the way they start to overcome and they find their stride and they find their true gem, and then they have a hard time, and then they have another good time, and anyway, their energy signature sort of is almost equal and opposite to the person on the first timeline. So when you put those two energies together, they almost balance each other out. But what happens when you put all the energies together of everybody and you have 8 billion timelines? You have 8 billion timelines. Well, the collective energy of those 8 billion timelines create a pattern or a ripple on the fabric of the underlying time. So perhaps the timeline looks like this. Perhaps these little rings are each represent a timeline, and these little nodules represent little individuals that are unique or individual, but they're also reflecting the whole. So here we are, Scorpio time bender, going down the timeline. You see the grid here. And what's really special about quantum physics, the why it's quantum, is that quantum particles, as I talked about in the first video, they don't have to travel. If Scorpio time bender is right here on the timeline B, she doesn't have to travel, walk across this area here to get over to A. Instead, she disappears on B and she reappears on A. So, like this. So, here's Scorpio time bender on timeline B. And if Scorpio time bender knew how to access the quantum realm, she could actually change her timeline and jump over to A. Does she know? We'll find out. So if this was another representation of our fabric, of the underlying fabric of time, you can see that as we all change and grow, we're all like shifting and riding this roller coaster ride of a timeline together. And as more of the collective believes one way, the timeline shifts this way. And as one part of the collective believes this way, the timeline shifts that way. And so it's this moving fabric that's always changing, and it's always being influenced by all of us, by the collective, by the all that is. So here we are in our little Merkaba spaceship, body ship, traversing the quantum realm. So here's the quantum realm, a depiction, a potential depiction, and all those little lights are little Scorpio time benders made of sacred geometry of the Merkaba, that is a mix of the auras, the aura, the chakras, the thoughts, the feelings, and the way it all weaves together with the matrix of the whole. So here's the matrix of the whole with all these little quantum particles riding along their individual timelines, sometimes disappearing and popping up somewhere else. And here's our little Scorpio time bender and her Merkaba ship. So let's bring it together to how does that relate to us? Well, quantum thinking versus magical thinking is something I want us to reframe. So, first of all, if you are a skeptic and you are listening to my talk and you're thinking, yeah, that's hilarious, Tammy, that's magical thinking. Well, calling something magical thinking is part of the cultural programming to invalidate the science of magic. Let's say that the quantum realm has been studied for 100 years, okay, and we haven't made much progress. We've gotten to a certain level of understanding with the quantum field, but because the quantum field has these strange properties of appearing and disappearing, the scientists still, you can't get the math around it. It's hard to wrap the math around it, but it is not magical thinking. It's just something that we still have a hard time wrapping our mind around. And so when somebody poo-poos quantum realm or magical things, and they try to make you feel ashamed by saying you are a magical thinker, remember that you are advanced. You are actually quantum thinking. So to wrap it all up, how do we raise our, I think that one of the contacts with the quantum realm, we're always in a dance with the quantum realm, regardless. We're already doing it. We're already in a dance with it, whether you're conscious of it or not. So if you want to affect the quantum realm, you just bring consciousness to it. And so I'm only going to touch on these few topics because these are going to be the topics for upcoming videos on the quantum realm. So these are just food for thought. So changing the potentials by modifying thought programming. So the potentials, changing them, building your magnetic field and conscious embodiment practices. So you can build your magnetic field through conscious embodiment practices, which goes along with also understanding your emotional intuition as a guidance technology and mastering your own technology and also allowing space for healing. These are some of the ways that we affect the quantum realm.